And we finally made it to the very best part of the book after a lot of study and time. We're finally to the point where God is providing an answer to Job, which is what we've been waiting for as we've gone through the whole book. So just to review a few things. First of all, what was Job's constant request of God as he faced all this suffering? What did he keep saying he wanted? I want God to come and meet with me and talk to me face to face. And either tell me what I did wrong or explain why this is. I want God to come and talk to me. And at the end of the book of Job, God actually comes and he talks to him. And this is what we finally got to last week. God comes to Job. How does he come to him? In what? In a storm. And so finally God comes to Job, and he comes to Job in a storm. Maybe it's kind of fitting that we've had some storms lately. And just imagine, this is how God came to Job in the middle of a thunderstorm. Why would God come to Job in that way? Just showing his power. And even for us today, we've got weather people, we have nice homes, and yet when there's a bad thunderstorm, how do you feel? You feel kind of small and afraid and powerless, right? And thankfully at our house, there wasn't any damage or damaging winds even, but there were a couple really loud thunderclaps. The ones that you're like hearing lots of thunder, and all of a sudden there's just this boom that shakes the house, and you just feel small, right? And it seems that this is what God's trying to impress on Job. Job, all the things you've been saying about, here's what I owe you. Well, look at who I am. Remember who I am. God comes to him in a storm. And then God starts talking, and instead of just explaining everything, which we might have expected, God starts to point Job to all sorts of things in nature. And so he doesn't come and, well, Job, here's why you're going through these sufferings. It's not what he does. He comes and he says, Job, look at this and look at that. Right? If you were here last week, do you remember what things in his creation did God point to as proof of his power and control? The foundations of the earth. Job, were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? And of course, Job had to say, no, I wasn't. So just the earth itself, God created this. What else did he point to? The sun and the moon and the stars. And Job, do you have any control over it? Do you make the sun come up in the morning? Right? Do you control the sunrise? And of course, Job must have been, well, of course not. No, I don't. Only you do that, God. What else did he point to? Weather. And so, like thunderstorms and lightning. And are you in control of this, Job? And of course, the answer was no. Anything else you remember from last time? Separating the land and the water. And God talks like, are you the one who puts up a barrier for the sea? And of course, even today, we can't put up a barrier for the sea. Right? The sea is so much stronger than any of us are. But God did that. He said to the sea, stop right there. And it stopped. One other one I remember is the constellations. So not just the sun, moon, and stars, but you set the constellations there. One of our members was listening at home last week, and they talked to me on Sunday, and they said that the constellations are always in the same place. Different than like the sun and the planets are always moving. But especially at the same time of year, the constellations are always in the same place. And so if you go out April 15th, you look up and it's the same. And this is what led people long ago to, they really knew every night I go out and this is what I see. And this is how sailors could tell where they were going, right? Looking at the stars and travelers, and just there's this constancy in the universe that's so beyond us. And God says, this is all This is all me. What do you think? How do you think God wanted Job to respond? He hasn't given Job a chance to respond yet. But how do you think he wants him to respond, Denise? To be right. You can just sense God's wanting Job to say, God, I'm sorry for any part of me that thought I deserved an answer from you. I'm sorry for any part of me that thought I had a right to tell you how you should treat me. And God, I am so small compared to you. I bow to your ways. I bow to your will. That's how you'd think God would expect Job to answer. All right. Well, I promise today that we have a cool chapter because God keeps talking, which is the best part. But today, instead of pointing to inanimate objects like the sun, moon, and stars and the ocean, God's going to bring up a bunch of animals. And some of us really like animals. Some of us maybe don't like animals, but too bad. You're going to hear about them tonight anyways. Right? And God's pointing, as he's pointing to his creation, he's going to point out animals as, Job, are you the one who made these? Do you control these? Right? Just look at animals and realize that I am so much greater and wiser and more powerful than you are, Job. All right, so we're in chapter 39. I'll read the first 4 verses. God is speaking. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you watch when the doe bears her fawn? Do you count the months till they bear? Do you know the time they give birth? They crouch down and bring forth their young. Their labor pains are ended. Their young thrive and grow strong in the wilds. They leave and do not return. So it's going to be kind of unexpected as we go through this. But what's the first animal that God points to in this chapter? He actually pointed to a couple at the end of the last chapter, lions and ravens. But for us starting today, what does he point to? Mountain goats. Do you spend much time thinking about mountain goats? Maybe you should spend more time thinking about mountain goats. All right? Here's a picture of a mountain goat of the type that they would have had in Israel or the Middle East long ago. Do you know what that kind of mountain goat is called? Ibex. Exactly. This is an ibex. I-B-E-X. An ibex. Right? So it seems like this is the type of mountain goat that we're talking about. An ibex. Right? You can see it, the big horns and everything. Right? So do you know what their gestation period is? 12 months. It's not 12 months. No. From what I read, an ibex, a female is pregnant for between 147 to 180 days. So it's about 6 months or less, between 147 and 180 days is how long an ibex is pregnant for. And of course, God's asking Job, does Job know that? No, so don't feel bad that you didn't know that either. Right? But that's the point. Who knew that? Who knew how long that would be? God did. God did. He's got this all under control. Right? And you imagine in the ancient world how many people would be there to watch a female ibex give birth to her young? Nobody. Nobody would watch that. I suppose today, someone's put a hidden camera somewhere so you can see some of these things. And right? I know that's true because I have a video for you, if it works. Here is a video of baby ibexes, if I'm saying that right. All right? So you might not be able to hear it well. The sound isn't very important. It's baby ibexes trying to escape from a fox. That's what the video is of. See if there's all right. So these are the baby ibexes. It's like a cliff. I mean, they're on the side of a cliff. And there's the fox hoping that one of them falls.
Oh, man. Or breaks a leg. That's crazy. Oh, wow. Owls jump like a deer. Yeah, that art. My heart is sinking.
Oh, man. All right, isn't that amazing? And these are babies. Like that's what a baby ibex. They're able to walk on the very day that they're born. And you just think like we don't think about this at all. Now compare a human baby with an ibex. And now I mean we think that baby's cute, although some people were talking before Bible study about babies not being very cute, but most human beings think that a baby's cute. Right? How much is a human baby able to do? Nothing, right? I mean, you think like, how many years would it take a human to be able to, rock climb or something like that? Some people do it, maybe when they get to be 30 or 40 years old after a whole bunch of training and you just think, almost from day one, an ibex is able to scamper down a cliff. And we human beings, when we're born, right, without our parents, we could not survive for like the first 20 years of our lives, right? And just this kind of, can you think of the humility that God wants to teach us, right? We know that we're the crown of God's creation. Human beings are special in a way that animals aren't. But human beings are really helpless, aren't we? We are. Like a human baby compared to any animal baby is about as helpless as you can possibly imagine. And, right? We depend totally on God and the people that He puts in our lives, right? And so God says, think about mountain goats more often. Maybe think about baby mountain goats. Well, I think you would smile more if you thought more about baby mountain goats, right? But you'd think about God. All right, any other comments or questions on mountain goats? How do they know to be afraid of the fox? That's a good question. Sometimes animals are born with instincts like that, or that's what their mother teaches them that pretty quickly. But that's an excellent question. They know though, don't they? And not just mountain goat, but animals know who to be afraid of. Again, we human beings, we don't catch on to that stuff very fast. We need someone to point things out to us and teach us. All right, so this is what we get to go through today. This amazing creation that God has made. All right, next animal. So to verse 5. Who let the wild donkey go free? Who untied its ropes? I gave it the wasteland as its home, the salt flats as its habitat. It laughs at the commotion in the town. It does not hear a driver shout. It ranges the hills for its pasture and searches for any green thing. So next, God points to wild donkeys. Do you spend much time thinking about wild donkeys? No. This is where it was really helpful for me to read a couple commentaries, because I wouldn't have known this, but a couple of different commentaries said that one of the most admired animals of the Old Testament world was the wild donkey. That people in ancient writings were known to admire wild donkeys. Can you imagine why that would be? So they're able to survive on their own without anybody else in desolate places. You can't control them at all.
I think they protect the sheep, too. The donkeys.
I don't know about that. Yeah,
They're very protective, at least not the wild ones. But
yeah. So domestic donkeys have a lot of purposes to them. As I was reading this, it seems like there's quite a difference between domestic donkeys and wild donkeys. And that wild donkeys were highly admired because they had just this independent, rugged, fierce spirit. And this wild donkey was going to go where it wanted to and do what it wanted to, and no human, no other animal was going to get in its way. And this was something that was kind of attractive as people in the ancient world watched them. In fact, there's a person in the Bible called a wild donkey of a man. Ishmael. Remember, Abraham's older son, through his servant Hagar, there's a whole story that goes along with it. Some of it's pretty sad. But he has this son Ishmael, and there comes a point when Abraham needs to send Hagar and Ishmael away. And it was hard on Abraham because this is his son. And God comes to Hagar and makes her some promises. And he says, your son's going to be a wild donkey of a man. And I have always read that thinking that it was a bad thing. But from my new understanding, I think people look at that as that was a good thing. And so don't mourn for the future of your son. He's going to be this fierce, independent person like a wild donkey. And you wonder, did Hagar say, "Oh, that sounds so good. I've always wanted a wild donkey for a son." But it seems like that there was a compliment in that. Right? Which we in America, we really treasure our independence. We haven't picked up on this yet. Maybe a wild donkey would be a good symbol for the American spirit. All right? But this is what it's talking about. All right? How much control do people have over wild donkeys? None. Very independent. I suppose maybe for us today we could think of like a wild Mustang, which like out west, this was a thing. They were wild horses that were known to be very kind of fierce and independent, and right? Yet, who has perfect control over wild donkeys? God does. Right? And so, again, God's talking to Job. And Job, if you're concerned about my role, and if you're thinking that maybe I should listen to you a little more, look at the wild donkeys. I made those. I have perfect control over those. Right? Job, you need to just trust in me. Can you see what God's doing? All right. Next. Verses 9 to 12. Will the wild ox consent to serve you? Will it stay by your manger at night? Can you hold it to the furrow with a harness? Will it till the valleys behind you? Will you rely on it for its great strength? Will you leave your heavy work to it? Can you trust it to haul your grain and bring it to your threshing floor? All right, what's the next animal we hear about? A wild ox. Do you think much about wild oxen? All right, I did not know this either, but do you know what a wild ox in the ancient Middle East, what animal it would have been referring to? An oirox. A-U-R-O-C-H-S. Oirox. A-U-R-O-C-H-S. Oirox. Right? This was a real thing. An oirox was a wild ox. They're mentioned other places in the Old Testament. All right? They're extinct. Right? That's okay. Do you know what year the oirox went extinct? You know, come you. Didn't they teach you this stuff in school? 1627. They know that precisely. At least they claim to. This. Do I need my wild animal timeline? Is that what I need? It's not a nice even year, We need a nice even year. About 1500, the wild oiroxes went extinct. Yep, the last one was killed somewhere in a forest in Poland. was when the last female aurochs was killed, 1627. How they know that, I'm not entirely sure. All right, and so there was this wild ox that was well known in the ancient world that sadly is extinct to us today. And so next to the elephant and the rhino, it was the largest and most powerful land animal in Bible times. And so like for us today, we think of large animals, especially in that part of the world. There's elephants and there's rhinoceroses, and they exist today. But in the ancient world, they would have put this aurochs right up there, like a cow compared to a rhino cow type animal. Right? Here is a picture of the size that they were. And so it would be like a bull, but that would be a man's height. And this is where some of you have a lot more connection with cattle today. But a bull today on me would probably be, I don't know, maybe this high. Somebody correct me, right? Maybe a normal cow would be a little bit lower, right? But imagine a horned bull who would look at you straight in the eye, be that tall, right? And this was really, it was a terrifying thing, right? They were dangerous. People would kill them. It was the kind of thing that if you were brave, you'd try to hunt one, but you might die if it got angry and turned against you, right? This is the aurochs, wild ox, right? Here is an example of an interesting thing in the King James Version of the Bible. Do you know how the King James Version of the Bible translates this? It says, "Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee or abide by thy crib?" So did you know that the King James Version of the Bible talks about unicorns? And now when we think of a unicorn, we think of this rainbow white horse with a rainbow horn on it, right? That we have a lot of unicorns at our house for some reason, right? That's what we think of. The reason that the King James translated it that way is because the Greek word, which was a translation of the Hebrew word, said a one-horned thing. And what does unicorn mean? One-horned thing. What do you think that Greek word was most certainly referring to? A rhinoceros. And so in the Greek version of the Old Testament, it has the word that's the word for rhinoceros, which we would say that's not the right word because it's not a rhinoceros. But anyways, the translators of the King James Version, they put in a unicorn. So anyway, if you ever hear somebody say, well, there's unicorns in the Bible, and you could say, well, there is in the King James Version. It's not a silly thing, and it's not unicorns jumping over rainbows, but they're really translating a word that sounds like a rhinoceros, but what it is, it's a wild ox. Follow all this? Brent?
The very first Webster's dictionary said for unicorn, see rhinoceros, and vice versa.
All right, so Brent says the very first Webster's dictionary, which you just read in your spare time at home, it said, I didn't mean that. It just was interesting that you know this. It said that for unicorn, the entry said, see rhinoceros. And so in early English, unicorn was just a name for a rhinoceros, which would fit so much better here than what we think of as a unicorn today. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. What's that?
Does the Hebrew say one horn, or is it the translation of the Greek?
Yeah, so the Hebrew word is the word for this aurochs. And it shows up in other places, just as being this big animal. And there's at least one place, I forget the exact reference, where it mentions its horns, plural, which is what tells, Bible scholars, it's not a rhinoceros, it's something with multiple horns, which leads to this aurochs thing. So the Greek translation, when they put in one horned thing. And so whether they were thinking of rhinoceros or whether that was their word for this, that's just, we're kind of losing something in translation, it seems. the King James translators, and they're using the Greek version to help them with the Hebrew word. And then, anyways, I don't mean to digress, but just so that you realize, in the King James version it mentions unicorns, which is kind of cool. But it's not talking about rainbow unicorns. It's talking about something else. Sam?
Just so Brent's not the only geek around here. The older Webster's dictionaries describe a unicorn, which is the one horn.
Uh-huh.
And the two horn, the bicorn, is much more popular and it's seen today.
Uh-huh.
But there were two different ones. There's the bicorn and the unicorn, which are the same animals.
We are learning so much tonight. This is good. So, unicorn was a one-horned rhinoceros, but there was also a bicorn, which would be a two-horned rhinoceros, which is what's more common, would be a bicorn rhinoceros. This is fascinating, right? I think this is exactly what this chapter of Job is meant to have us do, just to think about God's creation and just how amazing it is.
And the names are so similar to what's today.
Yeah, and just to think about the animal world, and this is good. All right, just getting back to this oirox, right? Again, we think, well, how cool was this? Do you know what this is? This is a famous historical thing.
It's a wall with a bunch of names on
Yeah, but what if it has a hole in the wall? What's it actually called? It's a gate. This is the city gate of Babylon. Archaeologists have found the ancient city gate of Babylon, which was this great ancient city. Okay, now this is hard, but can you see that there's animals, put into the wall? All right, and maybe if you can see, like this is the same animal, and then there's just a couple different animals that are repeated over and over again. All right, so if you zoom in, this is one of the animals that's on the gate of the wall of the city of Babylon, and it's an oirox. An oirox, a wild ox. This thing that we're talking about, see, it's got two big horns up here. It's this big, powerful cow with two big horns. And so, on the gate of Babylon, this animal was that, we would expect there to be like a lion or, a tiger or something. But the kings of Babylon put on oiroxes. Just that this was something that was that powerful, a symbol of power. All right, so now what God talks to Job about is plowing a field. And for us today, would you imagine a rhino or even a buffalo plowing someone's field? No. I was wondering, have any buffalo ever been domesticated to plow a field? I don't think that works. Right? And you said, well, there's no way that would happen. Water buffalo. All right. I was thinking of a North American bison. Right? The point is, it's a huge animal that human beings, we've domesticated some animals and used them to do, but nobody used an oirox to plow their field because it was way too powerful. Way too strong, right? And yet, who has total control over even an oirox? God does. Right? Isn't this cool? Mountain goats, wild donkeys, oiroxes. All right, you would never guess what God talks about next. All right, verse 13. The wings of the ostrich flap joyfully, though they cannot compare with the wings and feathers of the stork. She lays her eggs on the ground and lets them warm in the sand, unmindful that a foot may crush them, that some wild animal may trample them. She treats her young harshly, as if they were not hers. She cares not that her labor was in vain. For God did not endow her with wisdom or give her a share of good sense. Yet when she spreads her feathers to run, she laughs at horse and rider. And so next we hear about an ostrich. Right? Did you know that there were ostriches in the Bible? No. Some of you did. I suppose if you'd read this before. I don't know that I had remembered that ostriches show up in this chapter. All right, and so we hear all about an ostrich. What features of the ostrich are mentioned? They're bad mothers. And they drive their young away at an early age. And apparently this is true. And so ostrich mothers don't raise their young very long. And pretty quickly you're on your own. They drive them away. Right? What else do we hear about this thing? No wisdom. And another thing that's mentioned that seems dumb is, where do they lay their eggs? They just make a nest in the ground and lay their eggs. And it's like anybody can walk by and crush those. You know, most birds, it makes sense they make their nest in a tree, but they make a nest in the ground and drop their eggs there. What else do we hear about ostriches? They're fast. They're super fast. So they may not be very smart, but they can outrun sometimes even horses. They go super fast. Right? It's really just this knowledge of animals. Of course, this is God talking, right? But here's how the animal world works. And would you have imagined a bird that wouldn't fly? I suppose there's penguins. Are penguins really birds? They are classified as birds? All right. So we got two birds that don't fly. But they run fast. And they turns around and laughs. I just love this. Don't you love that face on the ostrich? Like, you imagine the ostrich passing your horse and just kind of turning and looking at you like that? Yeah, it's just crazy. Holly, you used to be an ostrich farmer? Wow, with real ostriches. What was the purpose of what was the goal of the farm? For meat. For ostrich meat. It's very lean and dark red. It didn't work out. Okay.
One fun fact about ostrich in the wild.
Uh-huh.
The nest they dig, there may be multiple hens that will lay their eggs there,
Mm-hmm.
and they will take them and roll them. And even the ostriches we had, before we collected the eggs, they would stick them under their feet and roll them
Huh.
as part of the incubation period. And the mother, the hens that would go, would put their eggs in the middle and the other hen's eggs toward the outside. So if one got stolen, it was their egg, not hers.
Wow, that's amazing. So text says that there would be multiple hens that would lay their eggs in the same nest. And part of the process, they would turn the eggs over at certain times. And then if there were multiple eggs in a nest, the mother whose nest it was would put her eggs in the center and push the other ones out to the side. So in case something came to steal an egg, they would steal the other hen's eggs and not her own eggs. They're not totally stupid. They're not that dumb. Right? As I read just what commentators would say about this, is one of the points they would make is this: that the animal world is just as difficult to understand as Job's sufferings were. And so they thought maybe this is one of the reasons God points to an ostrich. Here it's not so much to emphasize strength, but just to say, Job, look at the animals. How many of them are just so unique or weird or different that you never would have thought this up? Right? A bird with feathers that can't fly but runs faster than a horse and looks like that. Right? Like, do you understand, Job, why this animal is on earth? And I think Job would have said, why on earth are there ostriches, right? And it was kind of God just saying, Job, if you look around the world, there's so many things that are beyond human understanding. Even why there's animals, right? And Job, just recognize, I'm so much bigger than you are. My ways are not able to be understood the way that you want to understand them. Anything else on ostriches? We're learning a lot tonight. All right, next section. The next section of the whole chapter is the only animal that was domesticated. So here we're going to hear an animal that actually interacts with people. Verse 19. Do you give the horse its strength, or clothe its neck with a flowing mane? Do you make it leap like a locust, striking terror with its proud snorting? It paws fiercely, rejoicing in its strength, and charges into the fray. It laughs at fear, afraid of nothing. It does not shy away from the sword. The quiver rattles against its side along with the flashing spear and lance. In frenzied excitement, it eats up the ground. It cannot stand still when the trumpet sounds. At the blast of the trumpet, it snorts. Aha! It catches the scent of battle from afar, the shout of commanders and the battle cry. And so next is a horse, but not just a regular horse. It's a war horse. And so we have a long, very picturesque description of a war horse. What kind of things does it say about this war horse? It's brave. And so not at all afraid to charge into battle. What else? Strong. And right, this is where war has so changed, right? Over the years, there's always new technology, but imagine being like a foot soldier with either just a sword or a spear, and somebody comes charging at you with a war horse. What chance would you have to survive that? Nothing. You know, and so the conquerors, they would ride on a war horse that would charge into battle. Right? I mean, this even went into some of the wars in the United States. There were still officers who would ride horses and train them not to be afraid and to be the first ones into the battle. Right? How else is it described? Just fierce, right? Snorting and pawing, and almost like it looks forward to a battle. Not only not afraid, but just the horse is just waiting. When can we go fight a battle? Right? And again, Job, just think of this creature that I made. Right? Human being, you can't stand against it. I have a picture of a famous war horse. Who's this a picture of? Alexander the Great. I mean, this is a real, somebody from long ago made this. Right? What was Alexander the Great's horse's name? I've even mentioned this in a sermon here at church. I know I have. And Bucephalus. Bucephalus. Alexander the Great's horse was Bucephalus. I think it was known to be a black horse. In this mosaic, it doesn't look so black, but Alexander the Great had a black war horse named Bucephalus that was part of his mystique as this great conqueror. Ironically enough, in the children's Bible that we're reading at our house, last night we read about Bucephalus. And it just was so fitting with, they have a little section in this children's Bible about what happened between the Old and New Testaments. And so it mentions how Alexander the Great came fulfilling prophecies in Daniel. Book of Daniel prophesies Alexander the Great. And so he came with his war horse Bucephalus and conquered just like the Bible said that he would. All right. Enough on war horses?
There's a black horse behind.
He's obviously on this one, though. So I can't explain why in this mosaic it's not totally black, but they just like the artists do what they want to do, don't they?
I'm trying to figure out what sermon you would have mentioned horses being.
I'm a little hurt, Mario. I don't remember what sermon I mentioned Alexander the Great's horse in either. But it was really important when it came up. Well, whatever it was. All right, we got one more section. Verse 26. Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle soar at your command and build its nest on high? It dwells on a cliff and stays there at night. A rocky crag is its stronghold. From there it looks for food. Its eyes detect it from afar. Its young ones feast on blood, and where the slain are, there it is. And so last we hear about what my translation calls hawks and eagles. And again, it points out some really distinctive features of them. What characteristics does it mention about hawks and eagles? Fantastic eyesight. And so even people thousands of years ago, they recognized those birds of prey. They can see really well, really far. What else? What did you say? Owl. An owl. That's another bird that can see really well. Absolutely. They build their nest really high. And so like we think of a bald eagle today, bald eagles build their nests really high up in big trees. Okay, contrary to that stupid ostrich, right, which builds its nest on the ground. Eagles, they are smart. They build them up high. Gainette?
Well, I think it's in Channel 2 where this hawk has built its nest up in that. And you always watch it every year. It comes back and builds a nest in the same place.
All right. I think
And they got two of them. Did it hatch yet? Did it hatch? They're watching it every day. They have
yeah. One of the local news stations has a hawk nest right on it at its like by its camera. And the hawk comes back every year and lays its eggs, and they watch it.
She pointed out which was the male or the female. They
Uh-huh.
burns.
Sure. It's just cool to think about.
Eggs in there right now, so
Okay. Everybody go home and find that channel and watch them. Watch those eggs. See when they hatch. Yeah. What Gainette's mentioning, though, is in here. Right? Notice at the end of verse 26. So it spreads its wings toward the south. What is it describing? What do birds do? They migrate. And so there's this understanding of these birds. They come flying through to the south. And just, even that hawk, I wonder, not all hawks around here maybe necessarily migrate because of our weather, but just coming back to the same nest, laying eggs over again. All right? We don't maybe think enough about birds. I found this chart, which was fascinating. World migration route for birds. So there's a few birds that go from Europe to Africa through Spain. There's a few birds that maybe fly over Italy. Almost all birds that migrate, where do they end up flying through? What is right here? The Middle East, Israel. And if you just think of how the world is set, if a bird wants to go from Europe to Africa and doesn't want to fly over the whole Mediterranean Sea, which is this big body of water, they want to follow land, how do you get to Africa? You go through what we call Israel today. Right? And so Israel was right at the center of migratory patterns for a lot of these large birds. And so just you see the hawk take flight, flying south. Right? People got this. In ancient Israel, you would see these large birds migrating over their every year. And this is an amazing thing. And sometimes we have some kids' books at home just about migrating birds and returning to the same nest, and some of them have the same mate every year. And Right? There's a story it's a true story. I forget the name of the bird, but some bird in Europe where one of the pair was injured. And so that bird stayed in Europe, and the mate went with all the rest of them, but came back to the same mate, to the same nest. And so every year they would say goodbye. The one would fly south for the winter, come back, find the same house with the same nest and the same person. And it's just amazing, right? And so God points to all these different animals. And Job, did you design this? And of course the answer is no. And just to look at the animal world, it leads us to say, wow, we have an amazing God. And when we think, well, God should listen to what I say, think about the ostrich. Or look up at the sky and God shouldn't listen to what we say. God should do what he wants to do, because God is so much greater and wiser than we are. All right, so what do all these animals teach us about God? How great and amazing and powerful he is. And creative and imaginative. Right? I mean, if you or I, just on our own, were to create the animal world, I'm not very creative. I don't even know if I could have come up with a dog. Do you think? I mean, what would you on your own have come up with? God, all these creatures, they're amazing. And it would be kind of fun. God, of course, gives us the examples he wants us to have, but we could continue God's line of thought, right? What other animals might you add to further illustrate how amazing God is? The platypus. Defies all. It has a bill, right? But it's a mammal. But it lays eggs. If I'm remembering. We have a book about platypuses at our house too, I think. Isn't that what? A duck bill? It has a bill like a duck, but it has fur, but it lays eggs. And webbed feet.
And the young lick milk through their skin.
Wow. And you're just like, God had to come up with this thing. Right? Any others that come to mind? Elephants. Whales. The anglerfish. The one with the anglerfish has the little thing off of its head like it's fishing. And then when a fish comes to bite it, it eats them. And we had at the Oklahoma Aquarium, there are just some weird things. There's an anglerfish there. There's mud skippers, which are they're fish, but they look like frogs, and they skip. Maybe they're not fish. I can't remember if they're fish or frog, but they just jump around, and they're mud skippers. I know. And then there's the lungfish. There's a lungfish at our aquarium, which looks like a lung, and just like the ugliest, weirdest thing. And there it is. And octopus. Yeah. They are smart. That's what. The blowfish. Yeah. So a blowfish. Emily and our favorite things that we've done is when you go to SeaWorld and you see the killer whale shows, the orca shows, just to watch those killer whales, and they're able to be trained and jump out of the water, and right, and all this. Just God wants us to do this, right? Be amazed at God's creation and give him the credit for it. And when you and I wonder, is somebody in control of the world? Is there somebody wise enough to plan out my life? And the answer, of course, is yes. Just think of platypuses, and you can say, I'm in good hands.
I was watching an animal show, what was about fish, what was about octopus,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a female octopus, and the male was coming to try to mate with her, but she did not want to be bothered, so she was actually throwing rocks at the male.
Wow.
So, I mean, you don't realize you're going, wow.
It's cool to think. So a female octopus throwing rocks at a male because she didn't want to mate with him. That's amazing. Yeah, Maya.
The thing is that what we as humans humans can't figure out is what's purpose for these animals.
Right. And so Mario, and for us, we often wonder what the purpose is. And sometimes it's just the amazingness of God. Yeah.
I think
Uh,
turtle too is unbelievable.
Turtles.
The shell and,
Yeah. And then you remember, I mentioned on Easter this turtle that lives to be almost 200 years old.
yeah.
I got another turtle story coming. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but look forward to another turtle story pretty soon, right? And it just all this from God. It's amazing. All right, we got to read one more section before we end tonight. So, start of the next chapter. We're going to end with chapter 40, verses 1 to 5. It says, the Lord said to Job, so God finally is going to ask Job for a response. Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. Then Job answered the Lord, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. And so God finally asked Job what he has to say after 2 chapters of all this stuff, from creation to the stars and the sun to all these animals. And it's kind of interesting. When Job's friends talked, how did Job always respond? Yeah, and how much would he say? Maybe that's what I'm looking for. A lot! So every time one of his friends talked, Job had a long speech he would give back. Are you forgetting how we went through all that? Right? It took a long time. Friend gives a speech, Job gives a long speech, friend gives a speech, Job gives a long speech. And when God talked, how does Job respond?
He couldn't answer.
How can I say anything? Right? And so Job, we kind of going through, you wonder, does he still have faith? It seems like he had faith the whole time. And just how he responds to God's word, it says a lot about Job. Right? He was humbled. He repents, I'm unworthy. How can I reply? I put my hand over my mouth. And what a powerful little thing. Job, when you really think about me, God says, what do you have to say? What are you going to accuse me of? And Job says, I'm stupid. I'm foolish. I'm just going to put my hand over my mouth. God, I have nothing I have to say. Right? You do what you want to do. And I'm going to follow you. That was Job's response. It made me think of other verses in the Bible which really encourage believers to do this. So Psalm 46 has the verse, be still and know that I am God. And so Psalm 46 is all about the world not making sense and nations raging against the Lord. And what do we do? And God says, well, just be still and know that I am God. God's going to take care of it. Right? Another verse from Lamentations. It's good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. There's 2 things in that verse we don't like. We don't like to wait. And we don't like to be quiet while we're waiting. Right? And God, we want everything yesterday, and if we don't get it yesterday, we want to tell somebody about it, about how we should have gotten it yesterday. And this is the Bible's encouragement. It's good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. And so maybe you're in that situation right now, where God, this isn't making sense. God, I really think something different should happen. God, why is it taking so long? And the Bible's encouragement is wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. One more from the prophet Micah. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. And I think it's kind of a well-known verse. Act justly. Love mercy. Walk humbly with your God. Right? It's so easy for us as human beings to try to walk proudly with God, as if us and God, we're on the same level. And I tell him stuff and he tells me stuff and no, that's not how it works. Right? Walk humbly with the Lord. That's what the book of Job encourages us to do. Thanks for being here tonight. It's great to have all of you here, right? Like I said last week, look around and see if there's somebody who's come on Wednesdays before who isn't here tonight. Invite them to come. It's great to have a big group of you here. You're like, what am I trying to say? The thing that can make you come back next week is next week, God is going to speak one more large section, and this is maybe the most well-known part of Job, because what God ends with is talking about the behemoth and the Leviathan. Have you heard those words before? God ends his talking about animals with a long talk about the behemoth and the Leviathan. Well, I can't tell you. Come back next week. Come back next week and you'll find out. The reason it's not in English is because we don't know exactly what it is, but we'll talk next week and read about the behemoth and don't give them the answers, Dave. Wait till next week. We'll talk we'll talk about that next Wednesday. Let's say a prayer. Dear Lord God, what an amazing world you've created. Last week we heard about the universe. Today we heard about some animals that you've made. And just to think about things like mountain goats and their nimble babies and wild oxen and ostriches and powerful horses and hawks and eagles. It's amazing for us to look at what you've made, and what it's meant to do is to make us humble people that realize you are the one with all power and all wisdom and all strength. Lord, forgive us in our lives for when we've accused you, when we've acted as if we're equal to you and you should listen to us. Instead, help us to wait quietly for your salvation. Help us to walk humbly, following you and your word. Help us to be still and to trust that you are our God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.